Over to you, Max.
Thanks very much, Matlub. Thanks very much for being a super kind host, and thanks everyone who's here today, whom I cannot see. I'm Max Tani from the University of New South Wales. You will notice on the left, it's University of New South Wales, Canberra. It's no mistake. The University of New South Wales has a faculty in Australia's capital, and I belong to that. This work is
by the way, just so you know, Marco is online now. So
very good. Yeah, I was going to say that and check whether Marco and Mariacristina are actually online. So this is joint work with them from the Catholic University of Sacro Cuore in Milan. Before jumping into the presentation, I just wanted to give you a very quick background. Because this work is not just out of a box. There is a long legacy and published work on this, also with Marco and Mariacristina. And the idea stems from something that I imagine most of us experienced, and that is go to either a conference or visit a colleague in a different department, or be visited by someone. And then we start having conversations with researchers interested in similar stuff to what we normally do. And from those initial conversations, there may be a new paper, there may be a joint research, a theme, there may be PhD students. So tangible elements of the outcome or the productivity of our profession. And a similar story applies to the private sector. When we go to the airports and see, especially earlier on in the morning, those people all dressed with nice business suits and expensive ties and shoes going somewhere, they are not really doing this for pleasure or to go on some mini vacation and back. They go around for some purpose. And the purpose, like for academia, is essentially to fact-finding, to try to maybe develop solutions or new ideas, or apply technologies and knowledge which they have. So in the past, with Marco and Cristina, but also in other work, we've been focusing on trying to measure the influence of those visits, which by their very nature are short-term. My visit here, I'm in the UK at the moment, is not appearing in any migration statistics. Is not counted, I don't have to register in terms of, the local authorities or so. But if there is a follow-up and a new work with Matlub, that will impact both our productivity. So there is a tangible effect on something which is somewhat not measured. So the original idea was to try to quantify or have a sense of how relevant those visits were to outcomes that we could observe, such as productivity or economic growth. But those outcomes tend to be indirect. And what we want to do was instead to try to go to the core of the innovation process or exercise that underpins innovation policy. And from there is the origin of this paper. It is still a correlational paper. And I'm going to explain this in the next few minutes. And we're really trying to not only say, look, we find an effect that those interactions that are carried out through physical movement are important on productivity or on output, but are actually important for the production of knowledge itself, and so expenditure in R&D. And it fits an aspect that is dealt by the research policy and innovation policy literature, which has been evolving over time from innovation is a public good, therefore you just develop it in one location, and by its very nature, it travels automatically all around the world at no cost, to instead something which is far more sticky in the location where it is. It is embodied in people. It requires a certain ability to receive, not only to transmit knowledge, and is definitely path dependent. Now, the literature on innovation has sort of caught with the idea that ideas move when people move, but so far seems to have concentrated only on the movement like permanent migration. So you have a scientist moving from one country to the other, and the mobility of highly skilled scientific workforce. However, in recent times, in 2019 and 20, we experienced something called COVID-19, which prevented people from actually moving around. And even though it's too early to explore the shock that COVID generated to movement, to have a proper causal shock to explore, the basic idea that I advance in here today with you is that shock, that closure of border, has somewhat affected the ability to exchange ideas. So to define what we're talking about, the dependent variable, so the key element that we'll be discussing, is defined as business visits. So these are movement that have a work-related purpose which last for less than 3 months. International statistics tend to account those movements and aggregate them in tourism flows. So it's very difficult to discern work-related flows from anything else for these particular type of interactions. But that's exactly the type of flows we're interested in, because we believe, as in the example I was giving you earlier, that it does matter. So key point here is that this mobility, which I repeat is not recorded, is not really properly measured, is measured extremely imperfectly, is important for generating knowledge. And in some of this research that I carried out over the past almost 20 years on this, with the help of the Department of Immigration of Australia, which funded me some time ago, we actually went to the airports and asked people what they were traveling for. And to my surprise, I thought that the majority of movements were related to following up sales, or there were movements that were ancillary to foreign direct investments, or some kind of prize for managers. A lot of people were traveling to exchange knowledge. They were traveling because they couldn't explain what they wanted through Zoom or through sort of internet. They had to be physically co-located in order to either understand a particular problem that clients had, or to present an idea to a prospective client. But they needed that element of connectivity in order to exchange information. So the work that exists on those type of visits tends to be focusing or tends to focus on outcomes and indirect measures. So there is work that relates business visit to productivity, to multi-factor productivity, or to economic growth. But there is very little, actually there are only 2 papers that look at the effect of those visits on R&D investments as a direct measure, as a direct activity that relates and produces innovation. And those 2 papers are based in the US. They look at US patent data. And the first paper look at the share of US patent data that follows visits of business visitors from the US to a number of countries, and they find a positive relationship with certain elasticity. And a much stronger elasticity is found on, again, the share of European-based patent individuals that patent in the US as a result of visits from European personnel, European workforce traveling to the US. And in that case, the effect is larger. Interestingly enough, on a much smaller scale and on Australian data, we find the same thing, which is to visit generates outcome effects which are stronger than being visited. And that's an interesting thing, that an interesting asymmetry that is conducive to probably different policy recommendation when it comes to whether this sort of activity should be supported. We also
Max,
acknowledge.
Sorry to interrupt. I mean, you've already mentioned kind of, this is a correlation thing. But I mean, the worry here is, of course, the causality issue, because there could be reverse potentially very strong, right? Because those who are productive are maybe more likely to be visiting. I mean, your earlier example about academics and stuff, if I don't have a paper, then I can't go to a conference. So, I have to be productive to do that.
Yeah, but we've done I've done preliminary. First of all, this is a correlational. I repeat, correlational study in a macro sense. Sure. So it's really causality in terms of what comes first. And when you lead or lags those visits precisely to control for that reverse causality, the causality goes in the direction visits to outcome as opposed to outcome to visit. So the big difference between visiting and being visited reflects the direction of causality, in the sense that it is the visits that generate a subsequent outcome, as opposed to visits being a reflection of being a highly productive person. There is an element of that, of course, I'm not denying it, but the strength of the relationship is in the other direction.
If I may,
please.
It will be clear later. The specification we adopted is a stock flow. So the impact variable is actually the accumulated stock of business visits.
Yeah,
that's at least mitigate the right point raised by.
Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption, Max.
No, it's all right. Actually, Marco, it's nice to. I mean, I cannot see you, but I can hear you. So it's good that you're in there. But so exactly. So I'll tell you, technically, there are elements where we try to bound as much as we can and limit as much as we can this possibility. But even when you lead or lag, so we use the accumulation. So we have a stock of business visits as opposed to a flow of business visits. But even when you look at flow and you lead or lag, the relationship is stronger with the lag and not with the lead. Matthew, please give me a sign.
Yeah, no, sorry, yeah, no, I was nodding, but I just realized you can't see me. No,
Okay,
that's all
yeah,
good.
I can't see. So
Thank you.
just
Yeah.
if I can go. Okay, very
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks so much. So we have essentially three related research questions. First of all, can business visit be a factor that promotes investments in R&D, so direct activities leading to the production of knowledge and of innovation? And then there are two ancillary questions. The first one is, well, if so, is the effect heterogeneous across countries that are leader in innovation or lagging in innovation? And that idea tries to capture the fact that innovation leaders are much more receptive to new knowledge, which is generated outside an institution or organization or a country. So in a way, they're better equipped with what is called absorptive capacity. So the ability to absorb information and knowledge that is generated outside. And the second one, we do the analysis or we explore this heterogeneity by sector using a standard differentiation that the OECD applies to sort of high-tech and low-tech sectors, and see whether there is heterogeneity in that as well, or this channel of exchanging, not only exchanging knowledge, but also fact-finding, meeting clients, trying to solve or better understand problems, has a different effect depending on the sector in which the activity takes place. So we're talking about business visit as a vehicle to exchange, but of course you need, and that's our implied assumption, you need a system that is able to capture the information and the knowledge that is generated. So there has to be absorbing capacity in the system in order to benefit from those exchanges. You can't just send someone and then there is no system to take advantage of what is learned. Now, in terms of data, I think we're really on the frontier, but it's a very imperfect frontier, because the ideal data that one needs to have is data by firm on how much they spend on activities such as these, so on these business visits. But such information doesn't exist. Even those databases that provide information, all financial data by firms, they give information on general expenditures, but expenditure on business visits are part of that. So it's very hard to have a measure of what firms actually do. So the best that we can do is to have information at sectoral country level, which we obtain from a proprietary database of an organization which is called Global Business Travel Association. It was originally the National Business Travel Association in the US, which was sort of instructed after 9/11, so almost 25 years ago, to study the influence or the likely effect of disruptions in travel and visits to and from the US. So what they had originally done was develop a essentially input-output table by sector and country in order to understand what the expenditure was in each of these sectors and in each of these countries on business visits. The data, therefore, captures the whole of domestic and international expenditure related to business visits that are done in a sector, in a country, in a given year. And it's information that is used by commercial airlines to forecast demand and load capacity, for example, for business seats across certain routes. The GPTA has been quite kind in offering relatively acceptable economic conditions to share that information with us. And we use that. So we have data by country sector here, which we map into innovation data taken from the OECD, and in particular the ANVER, the STAN database, with the fourth revision of ISIC. So the nice thing is that both dependent and independent variable are measured with the same unit, which is dollars at purchasing power parity. The dependent variable is not measured in number of visits or number of visitors, which tend to favor international flows, and also tend to sort of capture only part of what happens in terms of interactions that occur. And our final sample is about 8,000 observations, where we have 30 industries for 25 countries over a 20-year time span. So Matlub already asked earlier on, reverse causality, there is endogeneity, there are probably weak instruments. And so the strategy that we adopted, and for we, I should really say Mariacristina here, I'm not sure if she's listening, but I acknowledge her work on that, is basically to use a GMM approach with a dynamic panel data dimension. So basically, we regress the level of R&D expenditure on its lag value on a cumulative stock of business visit expenditures, which therefore accumulates the past and tries to reduce this element of endogeneity. And then we have indicators for the size of the industry. So we use employment, and then the openness of the economy to the rest of the world. So we have a trade indicator, and then we have dummies for sort of year and countries. So R&D is investments in R&D. The business visit indicator is the log of the stock of business expenditure in a given sector, in a given year, in a given country, which we get through a perpetual inventory method using a discount factor of about 15%, a depreciation rate. I do not know whether we explore different values, but or different depreciation, but it really shouldn't, it wouldn't make a difference to this. But the advantage of using the stock is that, as Marco was pointing out earlier on, in response to Matlub's question, is that because the stock incorporates the investment that have been done in the past, because our variables are highly autocorrelated over time, this element of endogeneity is somewhat reduced. So we apply GMM system, and this is the result that we get. So we apply pooled OLS and fixed effect, and we find that in both cases, the second row, so the logarithm of the stock of business expenditure does matter, but in the preferred specification, it accounts for these issues of endogeneity. The effect is relatively strong. It's a 4.4% elasticity, which is not nothing. So those visits do matter for R&D investments. That is, they do positively affect the production of knowledge, the direct production of knowledge that is done through investments in R&D. So this is the answer to the first question. So do business visits lead to more investment in R&D? Yes, absolutely. By how much? About 4.4%, with an elasticity of 4.4% for each dollar in business visit expenditure. Second question was, well, what happens with countries that are leaders in innovation? And these are Korea, Sweden, the US, Japan, and Germany. And for non-leaders. So for the leaders, we find a positive effect, which is just below the level of statistical significance. It is actually in the next slides.
So how are the leaders selected?
They are selected on the basis on how much they are investing in R&D. So basically, we're looking at the top 5. It's a metric, and here I'm asking Marco as well. That is, it's a standard in a way approach of defining the leaders using this particular metric. And so the top 5 countries that invest in R&D. For those countries, business visits do matter. Let me just show it here. But the level of statistical significance is just below the level required. And part of it may be also because the number of observations is what it is. But there is still a positive effect for the leaders, but it's not particularly strong. It's not statistically strong. It is instead strong.
They are the top 5 in terms of R&D GDP at the macro level.
Yeah,
that's why we single out the top 5.
Okay, thanks.
And Marco, I don't remember whether, as I said, we just focus on the top 5 because our sample is only 30 countries. I do not know whether we say, well, let's look at the top 6 or the top 4, whether there is any, it's really playing around the margin. But what we find is consistent that, it does matter, but is not that strong. Where it is strong, and we find it is interesting, is this for the remaining countries. So for the countries that are non-leader innovators, and you see what are these countries, it includes the UK, by the way, where the elasticity is not only statistically significant, and it is, in all cases, the statistical significance is at 1% level, so it's quite strong. But the effect, the magnitude of the effect, is actually larger. So we find that those visits are important for the countries that are not on the most advanced frontier of innovation. And we try to interpret that as actually it makes sense, because if you already have an extremely well-developed system to generate new knowledge, new productive knowledge, and innovation, the business visits are just one extra channel to generate what you're already naturally generating. But for countries that instead are one step behind, the fact of using business visits that are, to an extent, a cheaper way to access information which lies outside your country, in this case, to us makes perfect sense. You invest into this sort of activity to learn something or to bring back something that you haven't generated internally.
Do you have, I don't know how relevant this is going to be, but the other angle kind of is that trade between kind of leader and followers has a huge impact on the follower, the increase in. So I was just wondering if there is a confounding thing going on there, that the trade part of it with some of the countries at least you have listed is quite high, and therefore that.
We do control for trade.
So you have, okay. Did you have? Sorry, I didn't see that. Okay.
So if it's the fourth one. We do control for that.
Right.
And we also do control for trade size. Not for trade size, but for the size of the sector, for size of the industry. So we look at the amount of employment, employees and employment in that sector. So we really do try all sort of stuff. And we throw in fixed effects. It's interesting. I mean, you raise an interesting point, because even in other studies that have done on indirect effects, so where the dependent variable is productivity and control for trade, not only control for trade, but also control for foreign direct investment, those variables are significant and going in the direction you expect, but still the business visits, they do have a strong positive effect. A positive effect that with Marco and Mariacristina, we measure being on productivity half the size of investing directly in R&D. So it's really a distinct channel, even though its measurement is really imperfect. It's really a distinct channel, additional channel to access knowledge which is outside. And I go back to the example I was giving at the beginning. You invite someone here, or you go outside and you give a talk at a different university or a seminar, and it does happen that someone approaches you and you start talking about joint research, or there is a new PhD student, or you somewhat get engaged with something else that you didn't expect at the beginning. And your visit is a short visit, is not recorded anywhere, but there is an impact on your own personal productivity and on the level of knowledge that you leave behind in the place that you visited. So that is basically what we're what we interpret this thing being. So just to recap on this one, so we find an effect, positive elasticity. In general, this elasticity is stronger for the countries that are not at the at the frontier of innovation, but just behind. I don't think we split countries further in terms of saying, well, maybe there is, the top 5 at the board on the frontier. How about the next 5 or the next 10, and so forth? So this is an average result, but we do find that in general the effect becomes stronger as you come away from that particular frontier. In our interpretation is because if you're already at the frontier, you already have a system that is generating knowledge. And so the value added of yet another channel is probably less, even though it is positive, but statistically not significant. But the effect, the value added of this additional channel is less than for countries that instead don't have such a high or highly developed system of producing knowledge. The next thing that we do is then to look at high and low tech industries, where high and low tech industries is based on sort of what the literature suggests doing when it comes to this sort of split. And what we find that the strongest effect, the strongest elasticity going from the stock of visits expenditure to expenditure in R&D comes from the non-leader innovators, but in the high-tech or high R&D intensity industries. So these are the places that do benefit the most from the visits. also the low-tech benefits, and the low-tech benefits in both leader and non-leader countries when it comes to innovation. So we have some kind of ranking of where the effect of these visits is strongest, which is on the high-tech industries in non-leading innovators, followed by low high-tech industries in leading innovators and non-leading innovators. So where do we go from here? Well, we set out to fill a very specific gap in the literature, which is to add some sort of light on the relationship between business visits and not the indirect effect of generating new knowledge, which is on productivity and growth, but on the actual direct indicator of knowledge production, which is innovation activity as measured by investment in R&D. We find that the effect is very strong, is extremely significant from a statistical point of view, and is strongest in the countries that are just one step away from the technology frontier, but are developing their own high-tech industries. And picking up on what you're saying earlier, Matlub, it wouldn't be surprising when we, if we had more detail about who goes where, that there is some kind of technology, I don't want to call it technology transfer, but some kind of strong interaction between the non-leading high-tech industry and the high-tech industry of the leader that maybe transfer some of that productive knowledge to the other countries. All of these, of course, has to be based on the assumption, which for us is unobservable. I mean, we try to use dummies and fixed effect, that there is a certain level of absorptive capacity on the side of the receiver. But where we are is really the best we can do with the data that are available, because we cannot go beyond country sector year information. It would be great to be able to go to firm level in the same way in which all the literature and also innovation policy on R&D expenditure, and the reason why we have additional tax deductions for R&D investment, and it is so sought after in various places, is because they had data at firm level. We don't have this in business visits. It's a gap that somewhat needs to be filled, but maybe at the moment is too high an exercise. It would be interesting if, for example, and that could be a first step, at the moment, innovation surveys, which are the critical piece of data collection for innovation policy literature and innovation policy in general, asks firms, which is carried out at firm level, asks firms how much they spend or what activities they do to innovate. But strangely enough, they do not ask firms to what extent they use or what proportion of their revenue or the cost they spend in interaction of this type. If just those innovation surveys could add one question about this, it would be a huge step forward in filling the gap that we have in terms of going to the level of observational detail that we need and want to really put a final point as to whether those business visits are really relevant or not. In terms of policies, there is something that can be done. one of the things that, for example, I have observed both in universities and in the private sector is that whenever there are problems, budgetary issues or budgetary problems, one of the first things that is cut is the travel budget. So suddenly there is no more money to go to conference, there is no more money for visitors, there is no money for business visits. What we are showing is that the firms or universities, by doing so, are actually chopping off an important channel of their mission, which is to generate new knowledge, to generate new productive knowledge. So one should be careful before cutting budgets, because there are cost reductions that need to be implemented. Another thing that is important, there are, for example, in some countries, grants which are given to especially small firms to attend events or given some financial support for small entrepreneurs to go and participate in meeting, especially when they are abroad. One implication of this work is that there is definitely scope to be much more strategic about using this channel in order to foster and promote productive knowledge. And this doesn't mean that one should immediately increase the deductibility of expenditure or business expenditure in terms of revenues and so on. But there are small things that one can do to actually try to promote this sort of activity. And if there is an accompanying data collection, they could almost be seen as quasi-natural experiments to actually see whether this sort of channel does matter, because especially for countries that do not have the resources to set up an infrastructure to generate, to make R&D investments. They may have no money for labs, for testing facility, and so forth. The ability to still incorporate knowledge that comes from outside the firm or outside the organization is really important. And with this, I stop and say thanks, and maybe I stop sharing so that you can see you.
Yeah, thank you, Max. This is exactly the argument we have been making for the last few months now to the university to not cut our travel budget. So any questions? Okay, well, people are thinking, I just, these countries that you have leaders and non-leaders, I just think, it might be an idea to just to kind of try and different, because, I saw in the non-leader you have France but Sweden and all that lumped in with Chile and Mexico. And I suspect that there is a difference in terms of the level of innovation. And that just gives you maybe an extra bit of results and a little bit more possibly impact would be stronger potentially for some of the
three different layers, like high, medium, and low.
Yeah, exactly. So just to kind of give you an extra kind of way. So Klaus.
Yeah, on the line of what Matlob just said, getting more confirmative, robust data or results. What is with in-country mobility and visits? You should have something similar. I understand that internationally the effects might be even stronger, but you should find something also nationally. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, actually, the big advantage of this data is that it's expenditure on business visit in a certain sector, in a certain year, in a certain country. That includes both domestic and international visit.
Oh.
So we have that. We don't have a split between the two. So we do not know. So we would imagine that, for example, in the US, there is probably more domestic expenditure on this than international expenditure. but we don't have that information by country. But it's certainly an improvement, as you correctly sort of suggest, on existing work, including work that we have carried out, where we only access international visitors or visits, simply because when you cross a border, there is some kind of recording, either because there is a landing card or you need a visa. There is something which stays. It's not expenditure, so it's just a number of visitors, and that's how existing research has done that sort of analysis. But it misses out completely the domestic element. I mean, Germany is another example. I think there is a lot of movement that occurs within Germany, not only between Germany and the rest of the world. These data actually incorporate that information. And in that respect, it's a big advantage, notwithstanding that they're not firm level data, but it's a big advantage on the existing one that totally miss out domestic expenditure.
Well, another possibility is, I mean, if you would focus on, let's say, events, conferences, not of academics, not universities, that's another strand, but even nationally, there are lots of events or conferences organized by business organizations, yes, or even companies providing exchange. One could use these kind of data and correlate it within certain sectors. I'm not sure whether this is a good idea, but it's just a possibility.
Yeah, no, it is, Klaus. The closest thing that I came across is a paper, and I am not sure if the paper ever seen the light, but it was about a big conference, I think a big conference of scientists, which occurs every year in the US. And that particular year, so I have a copy of the draft paper. That particular year, the conference was canceled because of a hurricane. So it's the perfect case.
Oh.
What happened, the authors, they collected, so they had a list of attendees, and then they looked at the productivity of the attendees following that event. I mean, one may need to have a bit of a stretch of imagination to see, you don't attend a conference and therefore you don't produce as much paper. But they found some effect, some negative effect of not attending the conference. What we are suggesting, and that's why, especially with Marco and Mariacristina, who are on the technology frontier on innovation policy, if we could have one extra question or two on innovation surveys, which go to firms and just ask this, that would be a huge step forward in filling a gap, which unfortunately we have, where we are forced to use macro event. The other thing would be to wait a couple of years, because COVID did cut off part of the world from the rest of the world, and just see basically what happened, even on these indirect measures. But it's just too early for that. We don't have enough information yet on this.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, then. That's end of the story. Thank you very much, Max. Thanks for being in the UK, in London. And let's go for lunch.